Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Martin LaPlante, CEO, Icefire Studios, who will be talking to you today about Microsoft Teams translation and language features. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC21. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link at the top. Check out all upcoming webinars. For example, on Monday, September 20th, join Ulrich Arkerbeck for slick attendee check-ins with QR codes, low-code style, as part of SharePoint Week. Full details at SharePointEurope.com. We also have SharePoint Week coming up next week, which is the 20th to the 24th of September. One unmissable week of free online SharePoint learning. Don't forget also, we have a Microsoft SharePoint tutorial extending Microsoft 365 with SharePoint Framework by Paolo Pialorsi on Friday, the 1st of October, 2021 from 9 a.m. CEST. Book now at SharePointEurope.com/pricing. Also, a big thank you to our webinar series supporters, Docs42 and Pointfire. And please bear with me here for one moment as we have a short video featuring Docs42 and Pointfire. Just bear with me.
Hey you! In the session you will see all about the great options of the Microsoft technologies. But what about generating documents in the Microsoft ecosystem? Like quotes, reports, emails, PowerPoints, and others. The challenges usually are many different data sources, an intuitive design in Microsoft Office, and of course, generating the documents where the user needs them, in SharePoint, the Power Platform, Teams, or Dynamics. Docs42 can do all of it. Try now yourself.
Hi, I'm Martin from Pointfire. This year I was hoping to entice you with a booth, games, prizes, giveaways. Instead, we have this short video to show you how we make the multilingual page publishing feature even better. It's so easy, the demo only takes a few seconds.
With SharePoint's new feature, your staff still has to translate each page manually. By adding the Pointfire translator, the pages get translated automatically for your approval. Go to try.pointfire.com for a free trial or contact us for a demo.
Okay, and after the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Martin LaPlante. Hello, Martin.
Hello. How are you doing, Shane?
I'm great. Martin, I can see you and I can hear you, so take
All
it away.
right. And you can see my screen. Yes,
Yeah.
there it is. All right. So my name is Martin LaPlante. This webinar is going to be about Teams, Microsoft Teams translation and language features. I should point out, I am not a Teams expert. Most of the findings here are, shall we say, experimental findings. If you find things work different, let me know, and maybe the next time I'll refine this with some new findings that people have found. So let's get started with a little bit of background. There have been a lot of new announcements and changes regarding translation in Teams this summer. So every couple of weeks, there's a new feature that pops up So I'll talk about some of those, and some of the features I'm talking about are just starting to roll out. They might not be in your tenant quite yet. So one of the things you have to know is that in Office 365 in general, there is one major language setting, which is your Office 365 profile language setting, which tends to affect most Office 365 components. Teams is different. Teams has got a separate language setting, and the Team desktop app and the Team mobile app, as well as the Teams web, each have an independent language setting. You can have a different setting on each of those devices and each of those platforms. And those control some of the interface language, not all of the interface language. So we'll go through what it affects and how it affects it. The language of the user interface and the content elements can depend on the app language setting. They can depend on the SharePoint team site language setting. Every team in Microsoft Teams has an associated SharePoint site, and it can have some language settings which will affect what happens in Teams. Your Outlook language settings, which might be the same as your Office 365 settings or might be separate, they can also affect the language in which things are seen. What I'm talking about today, there's more details. I've written a series of posts in my blog, and you can go consult that if you want more details of what I'm talking about today. So let's talk about first the localization of some user interface elements. So the first thing is the Chrome, that is to say the commands, the menus, the general user interface without the content. The Chrome is localized, and it depends on your app settings. So that works exactly as you think that it would. The command bar, and maybe I'll just show you very quickly what I mean by the command bar by opening Teams. So the command bar up here, it has a number of commands that you can put in, some quick forms. In English, oh, sorry, my cat has just jumped up to my desk. There we go. In English, you have some short form like /BRB. You can type that in quickly to say I'll be right back. In German and French, it's not short forms. It's /de retour dans quelques minutes, which means by the time I've typed this, I'm back. So that is localized. The content now, things like the team name, channel name, tab name, and so forth, that's a more complicated story. So the team name, already I'm at the third point in this entire seminar, and I don't know the answer. So the team name seems to be sometimes localized and mostly not. The team name maps onto the SharePoint site name, and SharePoint site names are localizable in SharePoint MUI. So you can go to the SharePoint site, give it different text in different languages, and that will affect SharePoint. That's good. However, that gets wiped out if you edit your name within Teams. And sometimes the language change makes it back into Teams, and usually it doesn't. And I'm not quite sure what the pattern is. It seems to depend on which site name you edited last in any language. So team name, maybe not, probably not localized. Channel names are generally not localized except for the built-in general channel names. So I'll show you examples of this in just a second. I will show you two different apps with two different language settings, and you can see if you customize a channel name, If you create a custom channel name, it becomes a folder in the document library. But the folders and document libraries are not localizable. Folder names, this is a new feature of Teams. Folder names can now be changed either in Teams. So the folder name in Teams and the channel name are going to follow each other. If you change one, it's going to change the other, but they're not localizable, and so there's no mechanism for it to be localized. Tab names, some of the out-of-the-box tabs, like posts, files, and so forth, are localized. Custom ones are not, and there's no mechanism for changing for changing the tab names. The language of the tab name will change for toasts and files when you change your Teams language. So I'm going to show you a Teams app, so you can see in this particular Teams app, I have a team here called General, and you can see the built-in tab names are localized, whereas the others are in whatever language they were created at the time that they were created. And I have it here. I see that the same tab names. So here in the web application, I have my language being set to English and not French. And I see posts, files are in English, but the other things, again, are in whatever language they were created in. Going back to the slides here, the SPFX tabs, which I'm going to show, that depends not on your Teams language, it's localizable, and it's localized based on your SharePoint language, not on your Teams language. So when you create an SPFX app to use in Teams, there are some localization options in code. And I'm not going to give you a lot of code, just to let you know that when these are developed, there is a lock folder for localization in which you can create JavaScript files called enus.js, frfr.js, dede.js, and so forth, that will have set the value of the certain strings that you define in your code based on the language of the user. But the language that it uses is the SharePoint language settings, not the Teams language settings. Okay, and this happens even if it is a native Teams tab and not a SharePoint page. So I'll show you how that works. So here I have, you'll notice this is an SPFX tab, and all of the text here is in Dutch. And that is because the Teams site that it's associated with is currently set to display for me in Dutch. Even if I go to my app, which is set in French, and go to the same tab, what I'm going to see is the tab in Dutch. Okay, doesn't follow my SharePoint language. It follows the SharePoint site language. I'm going to change my SharePoint site language to English quickly, just so that you can see. Change my language to English, and it's going to repaint this. Let's see. So it's repainting this in English. So if I go back to my Teams and reload the tab with my language English, this shows it to me in English. And if I go to the Teams app instead, where my team's language is French and I reload this, then it shows it to me in English. Okay, so it ignores the app setting. It uses the SharePoint language setting in order to display anything which is SharePoint. So this applies to SPFX. It applies to various other SharePoint components where the content in Teams, so this is what we just saw in case the demo didn't work, the content in Teams is going to follow the language of SharePoint and not the language of Teams. Okay, moving on. Meeting invites. So if you have a multilingual team, what language are people going to get their team's invitations in? And the answer is that depends on how the invitation is sent. So if the invite is sent directly from Teams, so you schedule a meeting in Teams and it sends out an email, the email will be sent in the inviter's Teams language. However, if you're scheduling from Outlook, then it's going to depend on the inviter's mailbox settings. Okay, so two different language settings that can potentially determine the language in which the invite is sent to everyone. There are some people who say it depends on the receiver's, the invitee's mailbox setting. It doesn't really, but I can see why some people think that. So I have here in the image, the inviter is French, and therefore the invitation was sent out in French. The SharePoint site is in Dutch. This is irrelevant. I just thought I'd mention it. And the invitee's Outlook is in German. So here you see the title. So you see that it's in German. They're using Outlook in German. The title is in French, and the text down here is in French. You see some German in here, but the German in here isn't really part of the message. There's an ICS file which is attached to the invitation, and the ICS file is interpreted by Outlook itself and put in this convenient format. But this is just generated by Outlook. It isn't actually part of the message that was sent. The message was sent in French. Okay, so that's a little bit confusing. To make it even more confusing, or actually, why don't I talk to you about this first? There is something on the roadmap for Teams September. That's now. It's not out yet, but coming soon. IT administrators can apply a new policy to set multiple languages in Teams meeting invites. This is all we know. We don't know exactly what that will consist of, but there will be some control over the language of invitations. So that's good. To further confuse things, Office 365 group invitations that you get when you create new teams. When you create a new team, it's going to create a new SharePoint site associated with that team. That site is going to be created with the language of the tenant for most ways of creating Office 365 groups. There's an exception to this, and that is if you're in SharePoint, you're creating a team site and associating it with a group, then you get to control the language in which the site is created. But in general, it is in the language of the default language of the tenant. However, the group mailbox is going to have the language of the mailbox of the creator. So there's a group mailbox created in Outlook, and that will have certain language settings, which will affect certain things, certain emails that come from the group. Now, that's the theory. All the documentation, some of the blogs the language of the group mailbox determines the language of group invitations. In my experience, invitations are always in the language of the tenant, no matter what the language of the group mailbox. But maybe my experience is wrong. There are lots of different ways to create a group. Maybe some ways to create a group. It's going to depend on the group mailbox. I don't know. So this is one of the mysteries yet to be resolved for me, is how do you determine the language in which group invitations will go. Next fascinating part of this is the translation of messages. There are all sorts of messages, chat and so forth, channel messages in Teams, and there is a translation feature which you may very well have noticed. So anything which is in the chat, if the translate option has been turned on by the administrator, it depends on the age of your tenant. It used to be that translation was off by default. Now it's on by default. So whenever you see a chat message, you have the option to translate that chat message to your language. So it will auto detect what is the source language, and it will translate to either your Teams configured language. So if you have a desktop app, the language that you set for Teams is a language to which it will translate everything. Or on mobile, you have the option to translate to a different language than the app language. That's only on Android and iOS, as far as I know. Otherwise, you don't have the option. Okay. Channel messages can be translated the same way as chat messages, except on desktop. You can't do it on mobile. And it is entirely possible to translate to different languages on your desktop and on your mobile, to have different translation languages. To turn on the message translation option, if you are the admin, you can do it either using PowerShell, or you can go to Microsoft Teams Admin Center. And when you look in the global policy or whatever policy that you're setting, there's something called translate messages, and you want to turn that on. Why wouldn't you want to turn it on? I don't know, but you can turn it on, and then the translate messages option is going to be there for everyone. I was saying in Android and iOS, oddly enough, in Android and iOS, you cannot pick the app language in the same way that you can pick it in the desktop app. It's always going to be in the language of the operating system. However, you can pick the two translation languages. So you can go to the translation. Oh, I think the screen capture in French. You can go to the translation option of the settings, and you can pick what language you want translation of the chat to go into. Okay, this is different on desktop. In the app, you cannot pick the app language, but you can pick the translation language. In the desktop, you can pick the translation language. You can pick the app language. You cannot pick the translation language. It's always going to be translated to the same language as your app language. Okay, I'll show you what that looks like if you have never seen this feature before. So if I have some text in here, then I can go looking for the emojis and click the three dots, and there's something saying translate, and it will translate whatever is there in that language. Interesting thing, things that you translate in the chat stay translated. You can turn off Teams, come back the next day, the message is still translated for you. It doesn't translate it for anyone else, it translates it for you. So I will get back to that, and here it translates it into my app language, which is French, whereas the same one when I translate it, and you'll notice that it stayed translated from the last time I looked at it. So this is already translated to English. I can see the original message, or I can translate it. So it's one message at a time. It's not the entire conversation that gets translated. So there is another translation option, which is in the immersive reader. So the immersive reader is something that can be turned on by policy. It's an interesting tool. People don't really understand what it's for. It was originally intended as a language learning tool, but it's got many other uses as well. So if you turn on the immersive reader, it's going to be able to translate. Immersive reader does translation. So it tries to auto detect the language of the passage that you're telling it to translate. And then it will either translate it on the screen or it can read it out loud in that language. And it has a ridiculous number of languages that it can translate into, much more than most other Microsoft products. So that's pretty cool. I'll just show you how that works. So here I have some text in Thai, and I will go and find the immersive reader. And what I can do is I can change my settings, and the settings that you want is you always want it to translate the document. Okay, so here it's translating this into Dutch. That's a translation language that I've got set right at the moment. And so I'm going to try a little trick here because I don't know whether you'll be able to hear my speaker. So I will change my audio settings. Change my audio settings to go to the computer speakers rather than my headset, and see if you can catch it. So if I select the passage that I want translated, or the first word of the passage, and then
Mijn hovercraft zit vol paling.
So I don't know whether anybody heard that. All right, I'll bring it back to the headset. So it's got some nice features where it can read it out, it can translate into any language. I will translate it to English if I can find English somewhere in this entire thing. And here it is. My hovercraft is full of eels. And when you hover over some of the words, it has even some pictures to explain what the word might mean. Okay, so very cool feature, immersive reader, and it's got some much better machine translation than many of the other features that are there in Teams. Okay, moving on. Spell checking language. So Teams normally assumes that you're typing when you're typing in the chat or in the messages, that you're typing in the app's default language. And so when you are typing things in Teams, the spelling checker is going to give you spelling suggestions in the language in which it thinks that you're typing, which is the default language. It's also, if you have a Windows keyboard language, it's going to check that for hints as to what language you're typing in. This is what it does in general in most of the versions of Teams. On the Teams desktop app, though, it's a little bit different in that it can auto detect the language that you're typing in and propose to switch the spell checker. So if you start typing something in Spanish, it might pop up a message saying, are you writing in Spanish? And if you say yes, then it's going to switch the spell checker to Spanish. This is client-side functionality. The information stays within your own workstation, and the functionality is based on your Microsoft Office installation, the languages that you may have set up in your Microsoft Office desktop. Next thing, coolest of all, is voice translation. There are also all sorts of voice in Teams, and there are some language features and some translation features associated with voice. So there are several different voice features that I'll talk about. I just want to show a slide to talk about some of what some of those features are and the technologies behind it. So it is possible to do automatic speech recognition. And in a Microsoft environment, automatic speech recognition is done by two different components, one which is speech to text, and other one which is normalization, which changes it from what you said to what you meant to say. So if you hesitate, you stutter, you repeat a word, you pronounce things incorrectly, whatever, it uses some rules to determine this is what you probably meant to say. So there's speech to text, followed by normalization, followed by machine translation, and followed possibly, ideally, with text to speech, so that somebody talks in one language and somebody else can hear it being spoken in the other language. These are all neural networks. And these are typically trained independently. Let's see if I can manage to write on my screen. I cannot. Okay, third try. Here we are. Okay, so here I have a neural network for speech to text, a neural network for normalization. There's a neural network for translation. Text to speech is typically not done by a neural network, but it can be. So essentially you have independent neural networks that are being put end to end in the API. This increases the error rate. So what Microsoft does when you have three of them being put end to end is that it's going to retrain this triplet to minimize the end-to-end errors as opposed to minimizing the errors of 1, 2, and 3, which actually has greater end-to-end errors. I won't bore you with the details. I find it fascinating, but there is some very good translation technology in SharePoint and in Teams and in Microsoft in general. So the first thing that they tell you when you go looking for full voice translation in Teams is you go to this separate app, translate.it, or the Microsoft Translator app. And what this app will do, you turn on Teams, you turn on this app. The app is going to piggyback on the microphone. And it is the person on the other end of the conversation also opens this this app. They select the language in which they want to see the conversation. They select the conversation code. So the presenter starts the app, generates a conversation code. The participant opens the app, selects their language, enters the conversation code, and they can see translated version. There's absolutely no integration with Teams here. These are two completely independent apps that happen to piggyback on the same microphone. But it is the most complete solution that is out there. The problem with it, besides the lack of integration with Teams, is that it's got relatively low privacy. You don't know who's listening, and anybody can listen in if they guess this 5-letter code that gets generated. But it works very well. You can reuse the same 5-letter code for multiple conversations, so people are always ready to listen, to see translations of whatever you're saying out loud. Okay, there are a couple of captioning, language-sensitive captioning features within Teams called live captions and live transcripts, and people typically are not sure what's the difference between the two, and the answer is they used to be different and they're getting more and more similar. So live captions uses the closed caption standard. Live captions are not recorded. There were other differences earlier this year, but the differences are now moot now that the storage has been moved from Stream to OneDrive. There were some features built into Stream and restrictions built into Stream, but now that it's OneDrive, the differences don't matter. Live transcripts, on the other hand, is something that will show you what people are saying. They'll show it to you in a slightly different way from what closed caption does. But when you are recording the session, it will also record a transcript file. This transcript file is searchable, and it includes speaker attribution and times, so that it's very useful, so that later on when you're searching for something, it will search not only documents, it will search voice conversations that have been recorded. So, and when you see that somebody said something, you can actually go to the video recording, see who said it, see when they said it, and queue it up, or just read the conversation. Live captions, live transcripts are based on two different policies, but they're really quite similar, and users have a choice between turning one on, turning the other on. So it's a bit confusing. So live captions are available for all Teams meetings, or most licenses. It's been like that for a while. It used to be that the speaker language had to be English, but since a few weeks ago, they've added a bunch of, it used to be US English, they added a bunch of other variants of English for speakers, plus several other languages. So there's a list of languages that it will support captioning in. Live transcripts is when you see start transcription. If you're the organizer, or if you're in the same tenant as the organizer. It will only work on the installed desktop version of Teams. It doesn't work in other versions. The text appears beside the photo rather than underneath, if that matters, with a speaker name. And speakers have the option of hiding their name if they want to. So there were a bunch of changes to this in August. So originally it was only for E3 and E5 languages, license types. Now most SKUs will support live transcripts. Originally it was for scheduled meetings. Now it will also support unscheduled. Originally it was only for US English, and now it is the same language list as captions, as live captions. It wasn't available in channel meetings or in Meet Now. Now it is. And Microsoft Search is now able to find recordings based on the transcript. So a whole bunch of changes came in just a few weeks ago to vastly improve live transcripts and make it available to a lot more people. So this is very useful. At the end of a meeting, when there is a recording of the meeting, there will be with it a transcript of the meeting. So it's stored with it, and you can go and download it either as a document file or as a VTT file if you want to caption a video later on. Only the people from the same tenant can download. So if you're an external user, you can't download the transcript. The transcript includes the name of the speakers, unless they hide it. It includes the time codes. If you are setting the policy in the Microsoft Teams Admin Center, there are two separate policies, one for cloud recording and transcription. So turn that on, and that will make that available to people when they're recording meetings. So this is just for transcripts in the language of the speaker. Is there real-time translation coming? End-to-end translation of you speak in one language and people can see the captions in the other language. That has a fair bit of votes in user voice, and over 2 years ago they said, yes, we're working on it. It's not there yet. It's not in the roadmap yet. So it's coming. We don't know when it's coming, but it would be nice. However, there are bits and pieces of this technology elsewhere in Teams, so you can see how that would look maybe by the time you get there. And you'll notice that in the questions they're saying, like a captioning feature like the presentation translator add-in for PowerPoint. Unfortunately, that has been discontinued. What we have in its place is something that is actually quite cool and is available in Teams. If you're using PowerPoint Live in Teams, then you can choose, if you are an attendee, you can choose one of 19 different languages in which to see the presentation. So the actual slides that you'll see on your screen will have been translated. You'll see a translated version of the PowerPoint on your screen. However, this is just the slides. It's not the voice, unlike the old presentation translator add-in. So voice translation of PowerPoint Live, not there yet. It may be coming back. We don't know. However, the best translation features are available in Teams live events. So if you are enabling, you can enable translation in the live event policies under Teams Admin. So if you're creating a live event policy, edit the global policy or add one and turn on allow transcription for attendees. And once that's there, when you're organizing an event, then there's something called captions that you can turn on. You set the one language that you are translating from, the list of languages that you are translating to, and it's an odd list of languages. So in this case, I've set it to Klingon, Latvian, Malagasy, and Maltese. And then users can select the language in which they will see the captions for the live events. So it's like subtitles, and they see them in their own language. They don't just see them in the user's language, they see them in their own language. So you can have the speaker selects the one language in which they'll be speaking. They select up to 6 translation languages from the long list. And during the meeting, when the captions are on, the attendees can choose one of those 6 caption languages from those that are available. And the transcript is going to be available for download, but just for the producer is the only one who can download them and then make them available to others if they want them. Okay, so let's talk about, we've talked about all the things that do localize, and we've given some hints as to what might localize in the future. It would be nice to have full end-to-end localization, full end-to-end translation. That would be cool. It's not there yet. In terms of the user interface and content of Teams, textual content, we've seen that channel names don't localize, custom tab names don't localize quite yet, except for some of the out-of-the-box channel names, the out-of-the-box tab names. Wikis are another thing where there's no localization option at all. It'll just be in one language. And there are a number of features within conversations, like approvals and so forth. Those don't localize. Invitations invitations are available in different languages, but they're not the languages that you would choose, right? So the person receiving the invitation doesn't get to choose what language they will receive them in. That may change soon with that item on the roadmap. Date and time formats will by and large follow the Teams display language that you set. And one of the things which has improved in May is that within the chat, within the calendar, it's going to dates and times are going to follow the format that's set in your operating system. So you're not stuck with whatever format was set by whoever was creating those items. So that's good, but it's not complete yet. If there are SharePoint pages within Teams, things that come from SharePoint, it's complicated. It will not follow the Teams language. It will follow the SharePoint language. So the user has some control over it. It will be in the same language in which the user would normally see the SharePoint site if they were to go to the SharePoint site. I'll show you a couple of examples of that. There are certain automatic posts in chat that depend on the language of the person who did it. So if my language is French and I set up a meeting within a channel, it's going to put up something that I planned a meeting, but it's going to be in the language of the person who planned the meeting. Everybody else is going to see that in the language that they were in at the time that they set up the meeting. If you go to the Files tab, you'll see in this instance we have 3 different languages in the Files tab. So in this case, my Teams language was French, so things that are part of the Teams interface are in French. In this case, the SharePoint language for the site is Dutch. So I see some SharePoint things like the name of the document library, the name of the column is showing to me in Dutch, whereas the content of it, folder names and so forth, are going to be either in the language in which it was created. In the case of channels, or it's going to be in the language of the first person to create something. So the first person to create a recording, the file name, the folder name is going to be in the language of that person, and it's going to be in the language of that person for forever, right? So if you're the first, you get to set the name for everyone. If you're using list templates, Within Teams, there are some features that use list templates. The lists themselves are unilingual, and they are set in the language of whoever is creating that feature from the template. If you're using, this is a bit of a downer. I'm ending this with all the things that it doesn't do, but I mean there's lots of things that it does do and does very well. So let's treat this as a list of things that it will eventually do, whether Microsoft has announced it or not. If you're using it as a phone system, the voice prompts are not localized. This is a more complex one, link previews for multilingual external sites. So for instance, if you have a link to Twitter, to Facebook, to something that does support multiple languages, the preview is not going to take advantage of the multiple languages and the ability to show previews in the language of the user. Is just going to show them in one language. Most of the apps that you can add in SharePoint, in Teams, sorry, are not localized, and that's unfortunate, including some of the ones that Microsoft offers. Microsoft's Forms is one of the better ones. It is more or less able to follow the user's language, but it doesn't do that for all languages because it uses different language codes. So Teams uses one set of language codes, Forms uses a different set of language codes. Sometimes they match, in which case you will see the form in your own language. Sometimes they don't match, in which case you won't. So Forms will allow you to do something like FRBE, and in Teams, even if your language is FRBE, it will not show it to you unless your language is FR, and it matches the language in Forms. For German, there is no match. There's no variant of German that both Forms and Teams have in common, and therefore it's not going to follow your language for German. It will follow it for many European languages, but there are a few where it's just not using the same language code. So it tries hard and gets most of the way there. All right, so I only have a few minutes left on the hour, so I will go and look at some of the questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Super, Martin, thank you. Yes, we will now start the questions and answers part, and should you wish to ask a question, please type it into the questions window now. Okay, I'll just start off with probably one of the first questions here, Martin. Let's just see here. What is the quality of the machine translation?
Okay, so when there is translation of things like chat, of things like captions, it's going in the background to an Azure translation API, and the Azure translation API for several different languages has very high quality. So this is not the quality that you'll get from Google Translate for free, and it's even better than what you get from Bing for free. So some of these APIs get tested on an annual basis. There's an annual competition of research and production translation APIs, and for certain languages like Chinese and German in particular, it has achieved what is controversially called human parity, which is to say that human beings can't tell that it was whether it was translated by a machine or a human. For certain other languages, it is close to human parity, but not quite. So the translation quality that you will get is quite good. Now, the things that get translated by and large are short snippets of text. So it doesn't use the full power that's available in the translation engine to read paragraphs to get context from other sentences to understand what you're talking about. So the longer the text, the more likely it is that the translation will be good. If you're translating just a short piece of text or a bullet point on a PowerPoint slide, it's hit and miss because it doesn't have the context information. But the quality is really quite good.
Super. Okay, next question. Is there a dictation feature in Microsoft Teams desktop, which is there in mobile?
I am not aware of any. And yeah, that's a good question. Mobile typically has less because it's trying to use some of the computing power of the phone and some of the engines which could be built into the phone. And phones by and large can't be guaranteed to have the power that PCs have. So
Sure.
I'm not aware of any. I could be wrong.
Okay. Is it possible to train the transcription engine so company-specific words are correctly transcribed?
Not at the moment. So the technology does exist if you are if you're writing your own. So there are two distinct APIs that are interoperable in the background in Azure. There's Azure Text Translator and there's Azure Custom Translator. Azure Custom Translator is trainable, but the out-of-the-box feature does not give you the option to use that. But if you're writing your own, you can use that engine. That engine instead.
Okay. Is the meeting recording and transcript archived forever, if not deleted manually, in Microsoft Stream?
That's a good question. It hasn't been out long enough for me to see them disappear. I know that meeting recordings have a limited lifetime unless you do something about it. But I'm not quite sure what the lifetime is.
Okay. How does the language support work with search?
Search goes through Microsoft Search, which has some very good built-in language capabilities, some language aware things. Stemming and so forth, plurals, past tense, that sort of thing. It can figure out based on the language of what is stored, what is going to match the search, right? So in some languages, English is the easy one. When you search in English, it only looks at plurals, which are very regular, and sometimes some tenses, past participle, and so forth to make it a match. It will auto detect what the language is. This is all based on the old FAST technology, and it is aware of grammar. It is aware of grammar in other languages. So it's going to do its best to do good matching. That's going to work in all sorts of different languages based on its auto detection of the language in which it's being stored.
And the last question we have here, Martin, is could you please explain one more time the difference between the Teams app SPO settings? This part is still a bit confusing. Thanks.
between the Teams app. Okay, so in Teams, so I'll show you where it is. So here I'm in Teams, and right now it is set in French. So I can go to manage the account and select under General the language of the application. And I will change it to English, English US, and then it's going to restart, and that will change the language in which I see the user interface. So this is independent of anything else in SharePoint Online, in Office 365, and in particular in SharePoint Online where the site is. So here it was in French before. Now everything is in English. That is where the setting is. Within SharePoint, the language in which SharePoint is being displayed depends on two things. One is the list of alternate languages of the site, which maybe I can quickly show where that is. Site settings. Language settings. So in this particular instance, advanced settings, this particular site will display in French or Dutch or in English. The other thing that you can do is change your own profile language. And changing your profile language is something that is somewhere in the depths of Delve that you can go and change your language settings, and that will determine which of those three languages on the site it's going to use to display my SharePoint site. So here, if I change my language to French, delete English, it will eventually change my display language to this site to be French, to be Dutch, to be whatever I set here. Okay, so this controls all sorts of different Office 365 product language settings. It's pretty pervasive, everything except for Teams, which has its own settings.
Brilliant. And if anybody has any further questions, you have your details on screen there, your email. They can reach out to you and connect with you there.
So you can just drop me an email if you have more questions, and I'll be happy to answer.
Brilliant. On behalf of the ESPC community, Martin, thank you so much for taking the time today to complete this webinar. We just have one more bit of business to do, and that's the prize draw. So, woohoo! If you can give me, I'm going to say give me a number between 1 and 10. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to count up from the bottom then, and whoever that person is will be the winner. How does that sound?
All right. I'm going to choose 9.
9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so I have an Ove K. You will know who you are. That's Ove K. I'm not going to call out their full name just in case. But what I'm going to do is I will take a little note here, and we will be in contact with Ove in relation to the prize, and we'll follow up, and we'll get their details over to you as well, Martin, so you can get the prize out to them. So congratulations to Ove. You are the winner of the, what is it again, Martin? Do you have a picture of it there? It's a
it's a Loom Cube, something which I should be using right now to put your face in its best light when you're doing video conferencing.
Brilliant. Well, the Loom Cube is going to OK. We won't call out their full name just in case they're in the witness protection program or something like that. Okay, Martin, thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you everyone who came to listen.
Brilliant. Okay, everybody, just bear with me here one moment as I just get back to my own screen here. Okay, everybody, that is it. Whoa, oops, I pressed the wrong button. Okay, there we go. Let me get back again. Jeepers, so many buttons to press. Where am I? I am here. Oh, it seems to have magically disappeared just when I need it most. Okay, let's see. As they say, never panic when these things happen. All right, hopefully this is me. No, that's not me. Oh, I don't know. It won't let me back to my screen for some reason. These things happen. But Martin's on screen, and that's more important. So you can look at Martin and he can wave goodbye. There you go. With that, thank you all for joining us today. Take care and goodbye.
Bye.